kicking things off today with a fun new little piece here. We're going to see some faces that you've recognized and some new faces that you probably don't. And the reason we've gathered everybody here is to reveal the newest rogue in the company. It is my pleasure to introduce to you all Glimpse.
There are greater things at stake than glory or vanity. There is purpose.
You're right. He's gone. You're safe now.
No, he got the data. Now no one is safe.
Welcome, everybody, to the making of our newest rogue, Glimpse. Today, I have a bunch of lovely guests here that are going to talk about the creation of this character. And without further ado, let's go ahead and meet them, starting off with someone that you all know very well. It's Pretty Hair. Nick?
Hey guys, I'm the game designer for Glimpse. It's been a lot of fun to make her, and I'm really excited to talk about her, some of the goals we had when we set out to start for her gameplay kit. But that's what I'm here to talk about primarily is gameplay kit and design choices.
Thank you, Nick. Joshua Hauser?
Yeah, I'm Joshua. I'm the lead technical artist working on Rogue Company. Glimpse was a ton of fun to work on from a technical standpoint, working with the animation guys, the material guys. Got a lot of the kind of behind the scenes of making her visually work to talk about there.
Thank you, Josh. Mr. Bryce?
Hi, I'm Bryce Homick. I'm the lead concept artist on Rogue Company, and I worked on a lot of the narrative behind Glimpse as well as a bit of the artistic direction.
Thank you very much, Bryce. Last but certainly not least, it is Kenzie Lamar. Kenzie, how are you?
Good. I'm the art director on Glimpse's creation and also running the narrative aspects of the character and early concept.
Thank you very much, Kenzie. Okay, so this is what we're going to do, everybody. We're all going to hop on a fun journey of start to finish on Glimpse. And at the very beginning, it's all about how do we come up with the idea of these characters? Where does it spawn from? Well, how do we really make the sausage? And so at the very beginning, we do rogue pillars. And what this means is we're trying to understand what character we want to create, what are we excited about, and what does the game actually need? And so the first question always comes down to what does the game need from a design perspective? And what this question is trying to answer is sometimes a meta will be established where we need a specific solve, right? So if there is a lot of intelligence running around, like a lot of reveals, we might say, hey, we really need an anti-reveal character because right now reveals are just too good. At the time for Glimpse, and if you hop actually all the way back to the beginning of 2021, we knew that we wanted to do a Camouflage character at some point throughout the year. This was a character that we were all super excited about, and we were like, I wonder what Camouflage would be like inside a Rogue Company. And Nick was like, very early on, he's like, hey, I'm gonna take that character. And I was like, okay, sure, maybe you will. And then he ended up getting that character because Nick gets his way at the end of the day. But so when we asked that question, what happens is we have a meeting, and it's a lot of the people inside of this room. And I go, okay, so from a design perspective, right now, it seems like the meta is pretty good, but I think we are in a position that we could bring out a Camouflage character. And seeing as this is the last rogue of the year, and we really wanted to do the Camouflage character, we knew it was going to be a stealth character, but we didn't know what kind of stealth it was going to be. The second question, because obviously as much as we want design to dictate everything, we want to make sure that we're delivering the best possible rogue for everybody at home as well as from the team. Second question is like, what are we excited about bringing from our side? Like, what does art feel really passionate about doing? Is there any character that they're really excited about? And if so, well, how does that relate to what the game needs as a whole? And a lot of times we'll have like 2 or 3 different kits or like themes of a character that we talk about. And whenever we have the overlap, that's where we know we have excellence. And that's a kit we're going to deliver on for sure. So we knew it was going to be the stealth character. We had our code name. It was Pumpkin. Don't ask about the code names. It's a long story. And I don't want to get into it. But we had this code named Pumpkin. And so from there, it was like, okay, we're going to do a stealth character. Let's lock in these core pillars. And what are the high level details that we're really going to commit to? And so we knew we were going to do Camouflage. And I said, I went over to Josh Hauser. I said, hey, Josh, we're going to need to do camouflage, which means that we're going to have, there's a lot of different camouflages we can do, but I need a stealth character. And I think, Josh, what was your response to that when I said,
oh man, it's like, all right. So, we're coming up with different ideas for what else is in her kit, and I'm like, that's gonna be expensive. Oh, that's gonna be expensive. You want her to go invisible? Cool. What you trying to kill me? No, it was exciting, to be honest. It was an exciting challenge. There's a lot that kind of back and forth to hit on what level of camouflage we could go with, and I think we kind of got everything we wanted with her.
Yeah, and I think I scared everybody from the programming and tech side, and then Art was like, hey, I feel like stealth is like a slam dunk for us. There's no reason to not do this one. And so when we locked it in, we go, okay, well, we're going to do a female.
We kind of wanted our cake and eat it too, huh, Josh? We were like, I want 3 kinds of stealth.
Bring it on.
You did kind of end up getting that, didn't you, Nick?
Yes.
Which we'll dive into here in a second. But we knew she was going to be a female. We really liked the idea of being a female stealth character. And then from there, once we lock in those pillars, that's where we kind of move down 2 paths at the same time. The first one is the narrative, and the other one is, of course, the design iteration, which we'll get into later. But right now, I'm going to turn it over to Bryce. Bryce, the pillars are locked in. We start the narrative process. And before we get into really how you actually, what this character is and who they are, can you give us a little high level of like what the narrative process is?
Absolutely. Effectively, pillars is a great word for the terminology because everything for that character is kind of built off of that. And so the first thing we try to do is think about the character's personality from the perspective of those pillars. We ask ourselves more frequently than not, what would the person be like if we were to meet them in a bar? What would that conversation look like? Because from that simple little bit of imagination, a whole bunch of things can be drawn in light of all the pillars that have been passed on to us. For example, with a character that uses stealth, we might ask ourselves, well, why does that person use stealth? Are they the type of person in that bar scenario who would be hiding on the side of the wall, out of sight and out of mind? Or would they be somebody who's simply not within your realm of peripheral vision because they're on the hunt? So once we have an idea about those pillars, we can then build keywords, build values, and start to build a personality for that individual, that character. The idea, the goal there is to give some kind of a seed to concept, to art in general, as to how those keywords and pillars would be visually represented in a compelling way, and a way that everybody understands. From that point, then we also are able to build a backstory as to who the character is, why they became that person, and more importantly, how they relate to the Rogue Company world and the events that are going on within that universe.
Thank you, Bryce. Now, before we get into who she is, what kind of stealth is she at a bar? Like, if you were to meet her at the bar, is she in the corner of your eye? Is she camo in the middle? Like, who is she from a narrative perspective?
I think it would be a little bit of both. You probably wouldn't notice her at first because she's on the periphery. She's hiding, but she's also hunting and looking for something in particular. So if you were to talk to her, I think you'd have an odd conversation that feels like you're not entirely dealing with somebody who is completely on the same level as you. She's different. But
Okay.
it would be, that's, one of the things real.
Awesome. Okay, well, now let's answer the big question, Bryce. And Kenzie, feel free to jump in on this, as I know you guys work very closely inside of the narrative to really bring this out. So by all means, feel free to bounce back and forth. So who is Glimpse? Who is the newest rogue into Rogue Company? What is her narrative? What is her backstory? Why is she in Rogue Company? Let's get it.
Well, Glimpse has been hiding most of her life. She's the result of what could be likely estimated as billions of dollars of research into genetic modification, and she was born into a lab. Unfortunately for her, her creators and captors deemed her too empathetic for their uses and scheduled for her for destruction. But before that happened, she was able to escape the compound with stolen cloaking technology, and she spent most of her life in hiding until she got sick of that effectively and vowed to stop those who created for her from hurting anybody else. At this point in time, she's emerged she spent most of her life basically hunting down her shadowy captors and creators with very little information to go on. And this led her to a situation in Mexico from which she couldn't allow one of the people she was hunting to continue with what she was doing. At that point in time, she's both revealed to the world as a whole, but also to Rogue Company in general.
So let's talk about real quick the genetic experiment part of it. Who is responsible for the genetic experiment of this? Is this Jekyll? Is this another foe inside of there? Like who's doing this work to create her?
There are a lot of potential sources for this kind of thing. There's a lot of corporations.
Okay.
Maybe it's Jackal, maybe it's something larger. But you gotta think about, I think, who in the universe has benefited from this thing, the genetic modification as a whole, because Pumpkin's been around for a little while longer than some other characters in our game. That gives you any indication.
Yes,
But it's
it does.
most, yeah.
Yes, it does. Now, she failed out of this genetic experiment. Let's just say it like that, right? That's how I view it in my head.
Well,
I know I'm not
think
doing
about
it.
Too
this
nice.
way.
Get her out of here.
Yeah.
Think about this way. If you've got a bunch of people who are willing to do genetic modifications on people, they've got to have a purpose, right? And we talk about the concept of stealth. One of those things is stealth is advantageous for people avoiding being hunted, but also for hunters specifically. So when they created her, they wanted to make her into something of a hunter. And one of the things that was wrong with her was the fact that she was too empathetic. She was,
She's
and
being made to be made into a weapon, basically.
Yeah.
effectively, yeah. Because of her empathy, she doesn't really function in that role as perfectly as she wants to, as her creators would want to. So in a way, for them, she was a failure.
And so now she's hunting her captors, correct?
Oh yeah. Yeah, hunting the people that made her, because she doesn't want that. Given that she's so empathetic rather, she wants to stop that from happening to any other children, because it's pretty messed up that she was born into this experiment pretty young.
Makes total sense. Person with empathy wants to make sure that what happened to her doesn't happen to anybody else. That's awesome. Now, is she? This is the question we always get a lot, right? Because we have kind of three factions established, right? You have Rogue Company, you have Justicar, and then you have Jackal, right? Where does she fit in? Because obviously she kind of reveals herself to Rogue Company now that she exists in the events inside of Mexico. Is she a part of Rogue Company? Will she be a part of Rogue Company?
I would imagine, given that indications seem to point to Umbra being one of the individuals that she was hunting, and therefore one of the representatives of those who created her, that her and Rogue Company's goals would align, as they're both hunting for Jackal and both hunting for Umbra. Therefore, she doesn't specifically exist within Justicar, and definitely not Jackal for that matter. But I would imagine that she would definitely want to team up with Rogue Company, as both of their goals align.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Bryce. Now, we have the narrative, right? The narrative is established. And as this is going on, Nick, at the same point as the narrative was being worked on, he was doing the paper prototype, which we'll get into later. But once the narrative is kind of locked in, that's when the concept team on the art side can really start coming up with thumbs and starting to work through the individual pieces of the character. And so, Kenzie, before we get into showing early concepts and things along those lines, could you give us a high level of what this concept phase looks like? And Bryce, obviously, as a concept artist, by all means, feel free to interject. But Kenzie, let's go ahead and talk through the concept phase of a rogue.
Sure. I mean, game development in general is a very collaborative process where we're all connected and everything's happening at the same time. So typically, all these things aren't in a vacuum. We're all talking about all the different features of who this character is and what they do and why we're making them and what role they play in the game and how they fit into the narrative and timeline. So for Glimpse, she's coming right after our evil, our most evil character we've got, Umbra. And Umbra kind of up to the level of technology, and he's kind of our the yin and yang. Like basically, Glimpse and Umbra, almost from the inception, were considered to be like yin and yangs of each other. She's like the opposite of him. She's light, he's dark. He was like built after a fall. She was, conceived, to be pure, but then was rejected and discarded. They kind of cross each other in ways that are parallel but opposite to each other, which is really fascinating. So that was one of the major aspects to her design was, taking what we did with Umbra and thinking about like what is the opposite of that? How do we make a character be like his polar opposite? Um, so that was a huge part of of her creation. So color palette wise, that impacts, like he's dark, she's light. He has lots of contrast. She is much more muted in terms of like the contrasting on her clothing. The materials that she uses are very, smooth. He's very harsh and metal. Even though they both are very high tech, that's also another aspect of that we were ramping up to. Is that I know as we released new rogues, they've been kind of upping their game on, like the technology level that they have. Their abilities are more extreme. So we wanted her design to adhere to all of those things. But stepping back from that, when we look at this from a concept perspective, every character can be kind of broken down into a really simple idea. So, for example, with Glimpse, we thought like, well, what if we had an elf in our game? Like we're not a fantasy game, but if we had a character that represented the features of like of your stereotypical elf, what would that be? And then the idea was that she's genetically engineered, so she's in a lot of ways better than a regular person. So she moves smoothly. She's fast, agile. She's graceful. She has presence without actually speaking or doing anything. People just kind of that's another reason why she's a failure is that she isn't as stealthy of a person as she should be. And she has the technology to be able to stealth, but she has a commanding presence. And her empathy allows her to infer a lot from people she's around. She seems wiser than her years. She's all of these aspects that you think of in regards to this. But yeah, so with the concept phase, we usually just do a bunch of thumbnails, and we keep reviewing that and making sure that they're hitting on all the pillars, and then we hone in on one idea, and then we take it to completion, and then we adjust colors as needed to make sure that the character fits with the roster.
Awesome. Now, Kenzie, one of the questions that I think we all had early on that we had an idea of, and you guys latched on to a specific one, is really what kind of visuals represent stealth? And I think that's a question for a lot of people of like, how do we convey who this stealth character is and how they go stealth? So could you walk us through like the different elements that you guys considered and things along those lines?
Sure. So one of the things we looked at was repetition. So in her design, she has a lot of patterning. That's like subtle, small patterning on her. She also has flowy fabric on her, which is sort of like watery, which, water, when you try to pick it up, slips through your fingers. It's very hard to contain. And usually water vessels that you contain it in are clear and the water itself is clear. So, we were thinking, deep thoughts on stuff like that for how we're going to actually show those aspects in her. Also, she's got very long, straight hair, which also kind of flows like water, and it slips in and out of visibility. She's very pale. She's almost translucent looking herself. So, those aspects of being almost ghost-like are also elements to the design that we ended up going with for her.
Nice. Now, I believe we actually have some early concept art, correct? Inside of here? If we could go ahead and bring that up, and inspiration and things along those lines. I know we went through a lot, so Kenzie, go ahead and walk us through this here. What are we looking at?
Right. So early on, I'm going to go way back to when we first launched the game. We had a character that a lot of the players, might know, Phantom, and Phantom was the genesis of way back then of this character. So in some ways, they're kind of sisters, they're kindred spirits, at least design-wise in terms of the concept. So her initial base outfit is kind of a callback a little bit to Phantom, but whereas Phantom is like the militarized version of what this character is supposed to be, Glimpse is her own person. So she's basically advanced beyond that.
Mm.
So she's more, she's more evolved. So she's not just like a mindless soldier. She's wise beyond her years. She's empathic. She's taking this to new heights. So the undergarment is very much in line with that. Plus, we were thinking like, well, how would, like technology wise, how would you actually be able to stealth yourself? Well, you'd have to be, not necessarily covered from head to toe with, an outfit, but like you probably want to show that most of her is covered in terms of some sort of, nanotechnology on the suit or whatever is going to cause her to be able to stealth up. So we had that aspect of the outfit early on. And then the other aspect was, we've been pushing the bounds in terms of like our garments and our cloth sim. And, again, I mentioned this whole fluidity and water aspect to her. And we wanted to represent that in the garment as well. So she has this poncho like, garment that she wears over her bodysuit. And that's like, translucent. It goes, maybe that's how she goes invisible. It flows like water. You can see through it like water. Her hair flows around that as well. So it all kind of flows very smoothly together. So those were like the major aspects when we were looking at the garment and who she is and where she comes from. So, this has been a long process for her. She's actually one of the ones that we've had kind of, like thinking of in our heads for a very long time. And it was really awesome to see her come to life.
Yeah. Now, after the concept phase, Kenzie, obviously, we get an idea on paper that we really like, and then we move into the model. When it comes down to the model, what from the concept were you able to hold on to, and what did you end up having to leave behind, if anything?
Yeah, that's a great question. We were not sure right up until we actually finalized the model that we were going to be able to do 80% of what she is. I mean, this was basically the what you're seeing on screen now. We definitely could do all of that. We could do. But then the poncho, we weren't sure that we were going to be able to actually make the poncho work. We weren't sure that we were going to make the long hair work. There was still lots of questions about the stealth tech and like exactly how we were going to handle that and how that was going to work. So, all the way through the process, we were constantly trying to think of like plan A, plan B, plan C. Like if we remove the poncho, how would we deal with it? Like, would we give her like just a shirt? Would we, how would we iterate that? And how would we make it work within the constraints of her pillars and what we wanted to say aesthetically about her? But, luckily, none of those things actually happened. And the team just killed it. And, she works. Like all of the aspects that we wanted out of her came to fruition and pushed the bounds of what we can and can't do in our game. So really exciting.
One of the interesting things to keep in mind, I guess, when it comes to these rogues and how they're developed, these things are all happening in simultaneous to some extent. So like we have these pillars hashed out. We're trying to get an actual visual for the rogues built out. Meanwhile, I'm working with the tech anim and the tech art guys trying to, okay, we know we want stealth. We know we want this flowing fluid motion in her hair, in her poncho. Can we pull it off? All the while designs like, hey, let's hone in a little bit. Let's make sure that the stealth works this way. How does that affect the stuff that's in progress cooking on the other eyes of the stove? So it's an interesting song and dance through that. That's why, can we do the poncho? We're still hashing out the tech. It felt really good when it all clicked. We got exactly the look we're looking for. We got the tech to work across all platforms, and we gave modeling the okay. Hey, make the magic happen.
Great, which I think is honestly a perfect segue, Josh, into the tech art, tech anim aspect of this panel, which is, well, everything that you all had to do. I would say that of the people who were our heroes, tech art did an incredible job for us. And a lot of that was Zoe, but Nick was very happy with all the material work that he got to kind of mess around with and get his feet wet with. So I want to just say thank you up front on that. But I'll turn it over to you, Josh. Honestly, this was probably our most ambitious character from a tech art perspective. Walk us through, what were your big takeaways, your challenges, etc.
It's interesting. I feel like every rogue we build is our most ambitious rogue, but this one in particular was a heavy hitter. Yeah, exactly. We thrive on challenge. That's how the game progresses. That's how each rogue is something that everyone gets more excited about because we are pushing that envelope. And this was Zoe on my team's first rogue, and he absolutely crushed it. He owned a lot of the tech. He built a lot of the systems. And so I asked him, hey, let's make this rogue, not just fully cloak and uncloak when her abilities activated, but we need all of her accoutrements too. There's rogues run around with various weapons on their person, etc. We need all of that equipment to vanish as well. We need it to flow well. If you're playing, you pick up a new weapon. We don't need just a floating gun on your back. We have to have this dynamic system to manage the cloak status of everything on her. So that was for sure a challenge. Getting that to play nice with the cloth sim, etc., was interesting too. We early on in development, when Tech Anna was playing with her hair, her cloth sim, we had her hair all the way down to I guess her waist, or a little below that. We were playing with various different builds before we kind of honed in on how she would actually look and be designed there. So that of course has a lot to do. The poncho and the sim start kind of colliding in funny ways, etc. It was an interesting challenge. Ultimately, we didn't like that from a visual standpoint, regardless of the cloth, and so we ended up trimming it down, and we sculpted the rest of her cloth sim to match. I'm really happy with how it turned out. Let's see. I guess we were playing with look development of like her visual effects of that. As we're designing the poncho, we're building out that weave, we're building out that kind of flowy mesh read. We wanted to make sure to, I don't know if we have any footage of her that we can superimpose transitioning, or we can add that later if need be, but we wanted to make sure that her transition effect had a similar kind of mesh weave. We played with a lot of different patterns, but we felt like that read the best, and we had this nice refractive look, or this kind of glow around the edges just as she moved. It was in a challenge to accommodate for all the states of her material and equipment. Oh, there we go. Yeah. So as she moves, she kind of lights up. She can pass right through, undetected, and so making that dynamic with her motion, making the gameplay and the design sing there was a fun challenge. And kind of considering what states, if she's crouching, moving slowly, does that impact her cloak? How does that translate across all players and what they see? Because you need to know your cloak status, but your allies need to see you. So making sure that read and was clean from a player perspective was a fun challenge too.
Now, how did you go about solving that? Like just from like a high level, obviously, but when we said, hey, we need 3 different states, we need, based on movement, we need different states on there. Like, how did you go about trying to solve that issue?
Yeah, I mean, it was a lot of back and forth. I was sitting down with Nick and saying, okay, well, what are the key aspects and motions that players do frequently in our game as is, and then how do we reward them for that play in meaningful ways? So if you're crouching, if you're trying to wait for the right moment, you stay fully stealth. You start to move. You start to kind of, we had to play with actually sound design as well to make sure that her footsteps felt right mixed in with that, kind of making the blend of the experience, all the tells that players are looking for already, fit well in a balanced way with her cloak system. So we also had to make sure that low spec and high spec had equivalent solutions, because there's visual differences, but we had to make sure through tuning that like it didn't give anyone advantages, that felt right. And so that was a very fun challenge in its own right there.
And Nick, early on, so we got this prototype super early, and it was one of those things that Josh actually mandated from us when we talked about it. He was like, hey, we need to have a stealth prototype very early on
this.
Which I think this is a good time to talk about. Just, we knew this character was going to be a decent amount of work from the tech side of things. And so what we got over the very first time was really just a pass fail of can stealth work in our game. Can you talk us through like what we had in there, which obviously was a rough stealth, but could you walk us through?
Yeah, we had
a
super just kind of rough iteration of what an invisible character might look like. How invisible is it? How does it present to the other players in the game? And it worked. Everybody was playing around it. It didn't feel too overwhelmingly strong. It didn't feel too overwhelmingly weak, but we knew we wanted to kind of do a little bit more with it. It was a lot of fun to see that in motion, and to know that this kind of felt like a very technically ambitious character, because it was the first time that we, far before the character's kind of actual prototype phase of, we were sort of handed this new piece of tech. This character can turn invisible. This is kind of what we're thinking. This is what it looks like. We've hooked everything up. Go play with it. And we did. It was a lot of fun. Obviously, it passed that first initial test. And that's kind of when we got the green light to kind of start, drawing out the specifics of how this was going to work. And how can a character turn invisible in Rogue Company? And everybody feels good about that. And everybody feels like we're still playing a fair game.
Yeah, which honestly, thank you, Nick. It's a really good segue. So, for us, when we talk about the pillars of the character, if you go all the way back to the beginning of this talk, we try to lock in pretty much the general theme for the ability. So for Cannon, it's a Gatling gun. For Runway, it was actually more of she's going to be an arms dealer because we knew about that. And for Pumpkin, we really wanted to do stealth, and there's a lot of different interpretations, but what we were most excited about was camouflage. And so in order for us to really make that a pillar, we had to say, okay, can camouflage work inside of Rogue Company at all? And so we had to back everything up accordingly. And so that's exactly what Nick just talked through. And so once that happened, now we get into the design phase. In the design phase, this is the most fun of all of it. For us, it's probably the most nerve-wracking for literally every other department. And the reason why it's nerve-wracking is because ultimately you can have a really good idea on paper and then it fail miserably inside of the iteration phase. Because it sounds good on paper, when you go to play it, there's nuances that you're forgetting about. And we kind of live by a simple mantra, which is fail faster. Which is that, hey, if something isn't working, we're going to just move on to the next thing as fast as humanly possible and really just make sure we get the best kit. So during this design phase, there's kind of two phases of design. I mean, there's more than that, but let's just say for the sake of this, there's two phases right now. First, we start off with the paper design. And inside of that paper design, that's where we explore a bunch of different ideas for what this kit could be. And so in this case, Nick, or Pretty Hair, whichever you prefer him by, he would go in and he had, a couple weeks to go through a couple of different iterations. And he knew that there's a couple of different stealths that you can do. There is the stealth assassin, which is come from behind you, kill you, ultra lethal. Then you have the stealth infiltrator, which is basically a stealth breacher, which is how does a stealth character get behind the enemy, not kill them right away, but get behind enemy lines and then really kind of assert their dominance. And the last one that we talked about that we felt pretty cool about was actually a stealth support. That one never actually came through. But the idea of a stealth support is someone who could go in there, get a revive off, and get out safely. And for Nick, I think, Nick, and I'll hand this over to you real quick to talk about the paper design phase, but ultimately, when you were in there, what were you gravitating towards? What are the big challenges of the paper design phase for you?
I enjoy stealth characters in other shooters, MMOs, MOBAs, like any game that I play. It's something that I mess around a little bit with. It's an archetype that it's present in a lot of different games in a lot of different ways. It's present in fantasy. It's present in sci-fi. And I think a consistent theme for me across most of those games, especially in the multiplayer ones, is stealth is very frustrating. Stealth is very hot or cold. You look at games that have stealth competitively, the stealth characters are kind of hit or miss in how they're used at the high level, but at a low level of play, they just absolutely roll and frustrate newer players. So my goal in paper design was kind of like, all right, let's try and do this differently. Let's try and avoid some of the pitfalls that stealth characters can often fall into in these multiplayer settings. But make sure that we still hit what's fun about stealth. It's fun to sneak up on people. It's fun to move around unseen and play by a different set of rules than everybody else in the game. So that's really how I would summarize my goals for the first kind of writing up these paper kits is make these people feel like they're invisible, make them feel cool, make them feel sneaky, but set them up in a way where it still feels fair, where they're not just ambushing and blowing somebody up and have bonus damage or something like that. Try and take the frustration out while still preserving the fun of sneaking around and actually being invisible.
Beautiful. And you definitely accomplished that one, bud. Proud of you there. So as we go through the paper designs, what we do is we review our work in progress constantly with the design team. And so we have this thing called active design reviews, which ultimately twice a week, we review work in progress. And so Nick will present the kits at a high level. This doesn't go into any of the details, but it's more of like, hey, I'm thinking about using a meter duration. And for the meter duration, I think I want 3 different stealths. And that's one option. Or here's another option where I just press the button and I go camo, and then it comes back on cooldown. Here's this one. And he explores a bunch of them, and then we kind of beat up that idea and we kind of harden it. And it's on Nick to decide, what to do with those iterations moving forward. once that kit is approved, which ultimately comes down to conversation between myself and Nick, we get into the iteration phase. Now, there's the magic part that happens before that, which the gameplay team brings it all to life.
Yeah.
And that's like the most important piece. We would be nothing without our gameplay programmers. And so they go through a little segment where they start building out for us to start iterating and fine tuning all the different variables inside of there. The iteration phase, this is the one where rogues come to life. We're through the paper phase. Now this rogue, in the most prototype version possible, it's normally a green silhouette on a green model or an orange model. They are being played in the game versus other rogues. They have temp sound effects if we're lucky. They have no quips, and we are constantly changing every single aspect of the character every single day. Now, the goal of the iteration phase here is we have to make a character that is both fun and unique to Rogue Company inside of there, right? And obviously it's subjective in nature, but we rely heavily on collaboration and iteration with everybody on the devs team, right? So inside of this iteration phase, I'm notorious for going through like 7 or 8 kits inside of 4 weeks. I'm probably the biggest one of just like, I'm not liking this, let's move on to another
definitely.
one. But we absolutely move very quickly based on our employee feedback. We hear what people are responding to, what they're not. And I think Glimpse was actually a pretty good example of a character that we went through a couple of different ability ideas. It was always stealth. Nick, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but it's always stealth, but how it worked and all those nuances changed. But you went through a couple of passives too. Is that right, Nick?
That's right. Yeah. Assigning a passive to this, it's always a balance of, you only have so much strength to give a rogue, and you want to make sure both of these elements feel good. We have this fun thing called the Dahlia Test for our passives as well, meaning that if Dahlia links to you and she doesn't really benefit at all, then it's probably not a good passive. It's probably too niche, and try to think of something else. We went through a couple of passives with her. Pretty happy with the one that we ultimately landed up on. I think it's strong, it's unique, and it helps kind of bring the kit together, and it always helps you feel like you got something to do. You feel I think my goal for that passive was, you're the sneaky lady. I never want you to feel like you get snuck up on. So that'll it makes you aware. It gives you lots of information. It's a lot of fun to play around.
So talk to me about this passive, Nick. What does it do, and really, how did you bring it to life?
It's a fun process, right? Because we have all these narrative elements, and I think part of being a designer for me is allowing those elements to shine through where possible in the kit. And I think, seeing as this was a genetically engineered person, I'm like, how can we work that in? How can we make that a thing? The stealth is driven through her poncho and her suit, so it's not really something that comes into play there. But her passive, if you can see this kind of little yellow ping here, it's almost it's a spidey sense, right? She is genetically enhanced. She has these heightened, almost elven senses, to quote our narrative guys. So she can kind of get that sense of the hair standing up on the back of her neck when she knows somebody's sneaking up, or if she can sense somebody just on the other side of that wall. They maybe hear the breathing, whatever it is. Glimpse is going to know that enemies are nearby, and it makes it very hard to sneak up on herself. And you can do with that information what you will. That's what I think the fun of this character is it is very free form. It is very flowing like the water. You can go, it's not a cooldown based ability. You can go in, you can come out, you get this information, this person's over here. You're getting all of this information, and you have a lot of freedom to make these choices with your ability, how you flow around the map, and when you choose to strike.
Now, Nick, what would you say during the iteration phase was like the strongest, like the hardest struggle for you for this kit? I mean, a stealth character inside of Rogue Company's
very
no easy feat, but
yeah.
I'm curious about it.
The hardest thing to tune was that little bit about how fast can you kill somebody after being invisible? Like, how much time do they get to react to you? That was the single hottest contested piece of feedback that I got throughout all of play testing. And there's a lot of stuff to think about, man. I mean, you have people playing on controller and different sensitivities, mouse and keyboard. Are they playing on the low spec? Are they playing on high spec? Are they playing on high ping? Are they playing on low ping? How much time do you give people to react? And at what point do you say, get good, get better? At what point do you say, okay, maybe this is too fast, this is frustrating? Finding that balance within there was definitely the hardest part. I'm not saying I nailed it on the first try. We made the best decision that we could with all the information that we had, and I think for all time, people are going to feel differently about how fast or how slow they get killed. It's different when you're playing Glimpse versus playing against her. But yeah, how soon can she be lethal after being invisible is the number one, I think, challenge and decision that I had made during the development process.
Well, I'd say, one of your biggest strengths and one of my favorite parts about working with you is how well you listen to feedback from everybody in the, like all of our employees, everybody who's working on the Rogue. I think you do a great job of making sure everyone's included. So I'd say you did everything that I would have done and better, right? So I think good job on that. I think it was fun.
It's tough, man. Everybody's different.
It's a tough one. It's a tough one, but I think I'm very excited about this kit. Super, super fun as to how it's played. Can't wait to get it in the hands of everybody else. So, as this panel, we don't always get to do these. Hi-Rez Expo is always one of those fun times. So, I say for us, and I'm going to start off with Josh here. Final thoughts, glimpse to the community, anything you got. Now it's time. Let's hear it.
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the kind of behind the scenes working with design carefully is we're always playtesting for months. We're working on this rogue. So I have really fond memories of both working with Glimpse and playing as and against her, just trying to hone in, having heated debates about, no, we need longer or less time. This can't be this frustrating for the player, this frustrating for the one fighting Glimpse, and finding that sweet spot. I agree. Maybe we didn't, I think we did do, we landed darn well in the right place there, but there's always room. Yeah, there's always room for massaging. That's up to you all. Please let us know if it's threading that needle between fun to play and fun to play against. No, she was a ton of fun. One of my favorite parts of working on rogues in this, in a game this evolved, is we have a ton of systems overlapping. So her cloak has to work right with reveals, with weapon wraps with VFX, fixers, heat vision, etc. Has to synergize with her smoke grenades, in a meaningful way. Early on, we were like, well, maybe smoke reveals her outline. We were playing with some fun ideas that I think we ended up strengthening her in ways where she vanishes in that smoke in a meaningful way. There's that nexus. I hope players enjoy playing with her and sort of finding those overlaps and appreciating that. And definitely do an emote while cloaked. It's a good time.
Thank you for the Easter egg, Josh. Bryce, final thoughts?
Glimpse is interesting because I think with her and with Umbra and some other more recent characters, we're taking a moment to get a broader understanding about the historical nature of the Rogue Company universe. And from a narrative perspective, it was a lot of fun to build and work off of that yin-yang concept that Kenzie was describing earlier. And I'm really hopeful that we'll have more opportunities to get kind of views into what is happening in the Rogue Company universe, who these people are, and the nature of Rogue Company itself moving forward in the future. Glimpse was a heck of a lot of fun to work on. How does one visually compose abstract concepts like stealth? Again, Kenzie touched on this earlier in a really nice way. And I think that moving forward, we'd like to continue to push into characters some of these more high concept stuff. Things like that. Yeah.
Beautiful. Kenzie?
With this one, like I said, the genesis of this character goes all the way back to Phantom's early days. And we, as a team, like the concept team, constantly is coming up with ideas that never get used. And we have a lot of back burner ideas that, we would like to have happen at some point. It was just incredible to actually see a character that was kind of spitballed, brainstormed, at this point years ago, and have all those hurdles just be, we did it all. Like, every single aspect of this character just seemed like it was undoable, and the team just made the impossible happen. And watching it all come together just felt so good.
Yeah,
Seconded.
upvoted. Nick.
I just really want to express gratitude, I think, to everybody that worked on Glimpse. I mean, it certainly takes a village, from the start to the end, to the programmer who we lost along the way, who did such great work. Michael Pullis, if you're seeing this, I appreciate you, man. Big shout out to the audio guys as well. I think when you're playing a video game, you're going off what you can see, what you can hear. Maybe if you're playing with a controller, you get a little vibration, a little bit of feel there. But we're taking away basically half of what you're getting out of a video game and what you can see with this character. So they did a ton of work to make sure that the audio, for what the enemies hear, for what you hear, teammates, all of that stuff, they just nailed it. And they gave me so many little knobs to make it feel good, make it feel right. We're excited about this character. She flows great from a narrative perspective, to the gameplay kit, to the way that it sounds, the way that it looks, the way that it feels. She's a bit different. She's going to give you those fun moments of stealth where you're holding your breath. Somebody's right in front of you. You know, they're maybe even touching your character model and they're not aware of it. She's bringing some new experiences to the game, and we hope that you guys enjoy it and you have some fun with it.
Whew. All right, my final thoughts. Oh man, it's hard. You know, it's the end of the year. You know, it's the end of the first year of Rogue Company. It's the final Rogue of 2021. I mean, I guess we're releasing in 2022, but 2021 season. Man, yeah. Obviously, I want to thank the entire team for doing this. Nick, you've did an excellent job throughout the entire design process. Thank you for being there. Garrett Turner from the audio. Nick touched on it, but Derek, you've done just an amazing job, even with the last-minute tuning right before the final build went out. I appreciate all the help inside of there. You know, for us rogues are our bread and butter. You know, this is what we love doing. This is why we do it. And, you know, our process continues to get better and better. And ultimately that comes down to the team. And so without the team, we wouldn't be able to do any of this. And so we thank you very, very much. In regards to the community, we can't wait for you guys to get this in your hands. When public test server comes up, we want all of your feedback. Let us know all of the feedback that you have inside of there. She has a new gadget called a Pop Smoke, and she's got a brand new gameplay style that's brought to Rogue Company. We want to hear all your feedback. Otherwise, I'm going to turn it over to Nick. Nick, take us home, big man.
Guys, thank you so much for joining us. Stick around. We've got more games coming your way. HRX Rogue Company Day 2 is here.